So I thought I would start because we're only a little late, so I thought we would get started. And we're waiting for people to drift in, and I just want to start by saying thank you for coming. And when you work with a panel of chairs, I will tell you it's like herding cats. So you will see people drift in and out all day because people had other places to be as well. So thank you for coming. I hope that this is a session that helps the younger people in the room navigate their academic waters. We have assembled a cast of leaders who are available to answer your questions. And I would like to recognize Dr. Hobgood, who is chair here at Indiana and who inspired this year's session. This is an AWAEM-sponsored event, and some housekeeping rules. Everybody should get a bag from the back, a bag of, I'm not allowed to say food, so I'm just going to say goodies and stuff. And the rules are eat quietly, open your wrappers quietly, ask lots and lots of questions. This is supposed to be a laid-back but informative session. Put your phones on vibrate or low volume. And there's bathrooms outside and to the left, I think. And our helpers in the back are Arena and Hannah, so thank you very much. So women as leaders were once as rare as unicorns. As time has gone by, and you know this, every industry is recognizing and seeing the value of women in leadership positions and what a difference it has made. Because women are actually wired differently than men, it results in the ability to multitask and be more social. We're seeing a change in how organizations operate, and people are taking notice. I learned a fact this morning. Out of the 3,600 full professors that are in emergency medicine, guess how many are full professors that are women? Don't answer if you know the answer. I mean, don't answer the person that told me this. How many? How many full professors in emergency medicine are women? There's 3,600 altogether. How many are women? 300. Wow, that's really generous. No. No. Go lower. Much lower. 56. No. Isn't that amazing? Right? Isn't that amazing? 56 out of 3,600 chairs are women. Or 36 full professors are women. So where are the women? So, oh wait, this is not working. Hang on. Well, at least there are now more women in medical school than men for the first time ever in 2017. Women's strength, industry, and wisdom are humankind's greatest untapped resource. The challenge then is for UN Women is to show our diverse constituencies how this resource can be effectively tapped in ways that benefit us all. Who is this? Does anybody know? Anybody know? She was the president of Chile twice. So when we are told that women have a variety of strengths, I'm going to take 5 minutes to look at some data, because you know we are scientists, collected over a decade. That's not me. Collected over a decade, looking at 450,000 feedback instruments pertaining to about 45,000 leaders, covering a wide range of industries. The studies will include data collected in 2011 and 2012, and include 16,000 leaders, of whom two-thirds were men and one-third were women. So it's a pretty good N, right? So let's look at what they had to say. So we're going to start shallow. Overall effectiveness. This is statistically significant. Women are overall more effective than men at being leaders. Let's go a little bit deeper. Is it related to age? So you'll see that when women and men become leaders, in the beginning, men and women have no difference in their perceived level of effectiveness. As time goes by, especially in the early part of the years, men are initially perceived to be more effective than women. Around the age of 40, the perception is women are more effective than men. Why is there a difference? Well, the perception is women tend to say they have to do twice as much to get half the recognition, and it takes them about the age of 40 to realize that. How about self-development? This measures the extent to which people ask for feedback and make changes based on that feedback. We know that most people begin their career, when people are young, they ask for a ton of feedback and then modify appropriately. Over time, you'll notice that men stop asking for feedback because, after all, they do know all the answers. And at around the age of 40, women continue to ask for feedback and modify their behavior. How about competencies? So there are 16 basic leadership competencies. Of them, 12 of them are rated higher in women than in men. The only two that are rated higher in men than women are technical or professional expertise and strategic perspective. The rest, basically, are better in women. So it takes initiative, beats everything out of the water for women. And there are some reasons why. For me, it's the idea of double duty. Women have to do more, right? When you go home, you have another hat to wear. And so we take initiative because we see what needs to be done and we just do it. Lest you think that this is only in the fluff industries, manufacturing, information technology, the legal world, R&D, sales, HR and training, women still are more effective leaders than men. So no matter what the industry, women are better leaders than men. And then we'll look at one more thing, perception based on rank. Even at the highest levels to the lowest levels, when women are the leaders, they're perceived to be far more effective than their male counterparts. So more women in emergency medicine are needed. I've just scratched the surface here on the value of women in leadership positions. The main goal of the workshop today is to help you to become leaders. Because the consequences of neglecting to address this unique needs of women in emergency medicine will negatively impact the ability to retain and recruit emergency physicians. So with that, today's agenda. We have 3 topics: gaining placement and stature within your hospital, how do you assess your next role, and looking at your personal institutional fit. So we're going to do a little talk, and then we're going to have the panel come up and sit here and answer questions. Do you need another degree? Because there's a lot of degrees out there, right? So we're going to do an introduction and a moderated session. And then finally, dead-end jobs and how to get out of them, because sometimes you end up in a dead-end job. So we'll do, again, a talk and a little panel. So first, though, I'm going to have each person come up alphabetically and introduce themselves. And you'll see little bios on the table. So I'll have everybody come up and introduce themselves. So starting with the beginning of the alphabet, we'll start with Jill Barron.
The pleasures of having the B as the last name. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jill Barron. I am at the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania, and I'm the immediate past chair of the Department of Emergency Medicine. I have spent the last, 21 years as a faculty member at Penn. I had 2 prior academic positions, one at Yale, where I met the esteemed Dr. D'Onofrio, and also one at UCLA. I am emergency medicine and pediatric emergency medicine subspecialized, and have built really my academic career through a number of different things. Had a strong component of education, moved more into a clinical research network-funded faculty member for a number of years, and then started diverting more toward a leadership pathway. You'll hear more about some of the choices I made through the panel discussions. I am currently pursuing a Master of Business Administration at Brandeis University in an executive program, and next year I'll be working as an American Council on Education Fellow, where I will be working on shadowing a college president because my career trajectory has taken me toward a great interest in higher education leadership. So I look forward to the discussion.
So next is Dr. Dattner. I guess I'm going to be burning a lot of calories.
Thank you for having me. My name is Betsy Dattner. I am currently the chair of the Department of Emergency Medicine at Einstein Healthcare Network in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and happy to be here. I started out my career years and years ago, it seems such a long time, in healthcare consulting. So after college, I went to work for a consulting firm in New York City, knowing that I wanted to go to medical school and had deferred medical school for a couple of years. So I learned a lot about the healthcare industry and how the industry works. Back then it was the era of HMOs, and it seems like we're all coming around in a big circle, coming back to sort of the gatekeeper sort of model. Did that for a year, was hired by one of my clients in Chicago, worked for a healthcare system in Chicago, and then eventually went back to medical school after those 2 years of really learning how the business of healthcare worked. Went into emergency medicine because of the incredible opportunities to learn about lots and lots of things and keep me really interested. Went to Penn right out of residency when it was a new program. We had just become, I was one of the very first emergency medicine trained physicians there at that program. We had no residency at the time. So went there and helped build the program. I served there in a number of different roles, running lots of committees within the hospital. I served as the associate residency director for a period of time, and some former residents here. It's nice to see. And so learned a lot about education there. And then from there, thought that I wanted to try to fix some problems in a way that I had learned as a consultant, and sort of took on the responsibility of being the medical director in that department. And then under Dr. Barron's leadership, was asked to be the vice chair for clinical operations, which was a fantastic opportunity. Took advantage of that, learned more about running operational multiple departments at once, and how to integrate that a little bit. Then I was offered an opportunity to serve as the associate chief of staff for clinical operations at the Philadelphia VA, which is a hospital, nursing home, 17, clinical departments, outpatient clinics, huge training programs, huge research programs, and then very quickly got moved into the chief of staff role there, and had all of those departments and medical credentialing and everything reporting to me. So learned a lot about overseeing a really complex organization and dealing with the federal government. And so we'll talk a little bit about institutional fit, and how that can work for you, and how you can make choices in some of those realms. And then I left there just a year ago to become the chair, just over a year ago, to become the chair at Einstein, and serve in a neighborhood that is incredibly underserved and an under-resourced institution, to try to figure out how we can better serve the population there.
Exactly. Hand off. Hi, I'm Deb Dirks. I'm from UT Southwestern in Dallas. My career is very much more boring than yours. So I did my residency at Cincinnati, interviewed at one place at UC Davis because I wanted to go home. So I went back to UC Davis, lasted there 16 years. Kind of started with my area of focus being research, kind of worked my way up to vice chair of research, did that for a number of years. And then one day I got a phone call from somebody who I had done research with saying, hey, there's this job opening up at UT Southwestern, you'd be great, will you apply? And I said, it's in Texas. And he said, come on, just come on out, come look at it. And so I looked at it and decided, sometimes challenges are fun. And trying to figure out how to manage a hospital like Parkland, which is under my group, that sees 240,000 ED visits a year, maybe a tad bit of challenge. So, jumped in kind of feet first, opened 2 brand new hospitals in the first 6 months. I know, fun, and actually started a brand new department. So, like I said, my pathway's been really pretty boring, but along the way I've had fun with kind of really close to the colleagues I developed at Davis, and really grateful for all that they gave me and helped me learn. Really grateful to my family, my daughters who've kept me grounded and have both called me in the last 2 minutes. And really grateful for all the colleagues I've met along the way, for a lot of the women in this room who have just really provided great counsel, great advice, great commiseration, and have really kind of made this a great career.
Chair of Emergency Medicine at Yale, and I think most of you have heard my life story if you read the booklet. Did you all read the booklet? So I don't need to go over it, because they asked me just about every personal question one could imagine on that. So I've had nothing but a circuitous route in life, although at the age of 4 I knew I wanted to be a doctor. It was really quite amazing. I dissected things, I did things, and it was really bizarre. My whole family will tell you that. I eventually ended up finally going to medical school, and I was in pre-med at Duke, and I went first to Boston for a variety of negative facilitators, And I was a nurse, and I was a clinical specialist, really basically got a master's in education and health policy because that's what happened back then. I was really not even clinical specialist, although that's what I was, a critical care clinical specialist. And so that's really where I learned most of my leadership skills and really having to deal with the world. And then I finally said my whole life all I wanted to do was go to medical school, and the chief of cardiology there, who was like the head of the HA and a very famous person, he said to me, okay, you want to go here? I go, here would be fine. And then he just introduced me to the person. I'd had all the classroom work already, and he said, you know, it's been like 10 years. You got to go back and take a course. I had to go back and take biochemistry, and chemistry was actually my favorite subject. But I said, I don't really remember even the class. So I ended up doing that. I did fine, and then I got into medical school that year, and that was it. And everything was always like that quote, life happens when you're doing something else, and that's really what was the case. The only ongoing theme is that I always wanted to do academics. I was always doing research as a nurse. I was always doing leadership as a nurse, and that really didn't change. And finished medical school, one of the oldest students at Boston University, because they have that 6-year group. So I was really the oldest probably student in the classroom. But you know a lot from having age. You also know exactly what's going to be in an exam without anyone ever telling you. And then I wanted to be surgeon and a trauma surgeon, and there was no such thing as emergency medicine. And then people said, it's coming here, and on like a wing and a prayer, I said, okay, but what happens if I match at some other hospital? I only really want to do Boston City Hospital, and are you sure it's going to come here the next year? I'm going to have to repeat my internship, and it did. So I ended up there, and then I had 3 kids, which no one thought. Everyone knew I was going to be pregnant during residency, or if they thought that I would be. My chair was wonderful, Peter Moyer. He didn't realize I was going to have triplets, so that was another challenge during that particular time. But we got over that, and it's been a wonderful experience. And you know, having young kids is really not difficult. And everybody says having young children at 40 is really not the big deal. It's having the 10-year-olds at 50 that's the big deal. All right, so it's really not the little kid stage and whatever. And now my children are 28, and all are doing remarkably well, and that's a great thing. And maybe some year their therapist will tell me I should have been home more, but anyway, that was it. I then, when I was at Boston City, I became the residency director, really not because that was really my path, but I was doing research there, but I felt that they needed more scientific rigor in everything that occurred there, and that was how it was going to start, and that's what I did. And then because of my husband, I moved to Connecticut. That was the whole reason that happened, which was thinking it was the worst disaster that ever happened in the world, because you know, having a hospital was like horrible. It was like in the darkest of ages, but I did my research, and that was it, and that grew because there were phenomenal mentors there. And then I was doing my research, and I went on vacation, and somehow I got named the interim chief, which I didn't want, and said I didn't want, 59 things, when my chief was taken out precipitously. And then there I was that, and then I said I would always think about being chair. It didn't come in the right time for me because my kids were still not even driving at that time in middle school, so that was difficult. As even when I did my fellowship in addiction, it came at the wrong time because I had the babies and I was new residency director, but you just did it because they just told me you have to do it. This is a life-changing event. So it just happens, and you do it, and I'm very excited to share anything I can with you all.
Okay, Dr. Hobgood, you're next.
It was going to be, it's like Azita's next. Okay, so I'm Cherry Hobgood, and I'm the chair here at Indiana University. And after all this, we're going to drink wine. So put that on your calendar. So, like, how'd this happen? So I went to college. I guess I'm a first gen. I didn't really realize that, but I'm a first generation going to college. And so I went, and I actually was going to be a theater major, which I was very good at. Those are very useful skills if you ever become a chair. Being a theater major is very good. So at any rate, I had to take this mandatory biology course, which I did, and I found myself going, I know the answer to that. Yep, I know the answer to that. Yep. And finally, the professor said, you're really good at this. You might want to consider this as your major. And I'm like, I don't know, but I do really like it. So I'll take another class, which I did. And so I ended up graduating with a degree in biology and, kind of crushing that curriculum, but not really having any intention, because that wasn't like, I just didn't have any intention. I didn't have a plan. I really didn't know the ropes. I didn't know where I was going. And so also really, I really like art, and I really like to make art. And so I was in the foundry where I cast this really pretty nice metal sculpture. And so I was kicking the investment off the sculpture, which when you do that, you look a little bit like Pigpen from Charlie Brown, because there's just this cloud of dust that surrounds you. And so I was absolutely filthy. And my microbiology teacher runs over, because I didn't have a job, and says, hey, this guy just called from Bowman Gray School of Medicine, and he's looking for somebody who's a really good lab person. You should apply for this job. They want to see you this afternoon. Can you go? And I'm like, well, I don't have a job. And so, yeah, sure, I'll go. So I went home, and I did my best to clean up, which for any of you who've ever worked in plaster, you got to realize it's absolutely filthy stuff. And so I go there, and I'm applied for the job, and I'm talking to this person, and I look down, and at the ring of every single one of my nails is coated in white. And I'm like, oh, this is not good. So I'm like sitting there in the interview with my hands clutched like this, and I interview for the job, and I get it. And it turns out it's this guy who's an orthopedic surgeon at Bowman Gray, and he'd just gotten his first RO1, and he had a ton of data which he didn't know what to do with. So I went to the lab, and I did all my work in the lab, and I did all the stuff, and I said, well, we should look at some of this data because I'm frankly bored. And so we ended up writing 19 papers across the next 2.5 years, the first of which was published in Science, and I was, because he didn't know what he was doing, the senior author. Well, that's my highest ranking publication ever. But it was kind of a good start. And so I'm making $15,000 a year, and I'm looking at him, and he's flying all over the world. And I'm like, this dude's going to Stockholm, and I'm over here writing the papers. What the heck is wrong with this picture, right? Like, something's wrong here. What are we going to do? And so I said to him, I think I need to apply to medical school. And he said, I think that's great. And so I did. I applied to medical school, and he calls me into his office and proudly shows me this 2-paragraph letter that he had written as a letter of recommendation. And I'm absolutely mortified. And I say, Chief, this is terrible. What are you doing? Like, you only wrote 2 paragraphs. He goes, yeah, but read what I wrote. And I said, well, what did you write? He said, I wrote, if you don't take this girl into medical school, you'll be making the single biggest mistake that you've ever made in your life. And he said, this is how you write a letter. People don't want to wade through all this crap. They want the point. Tell them the point. Just give it to them. And I'm like, that's really good advice. So he's right. I went to medical school, and I then became the medical clerkship director at UNC, ultimately, when I decided, after many a circuitous path, that I was going to go into emergency medicine. And I would write these things on the floor that would say things like, I'm going to arm wrestle you for this student, and I'll bet you I win. If you get her, I'm going to whoop your butt or something, and people are like, you have a national reputation for telling me that you really want somebody and that they're great. And when you write things that say, like, this is a really great student, they have great communication skills, I go, okay, that's good. I know Cherry, and I know what she's trying to say. And so I have, as you can see, the tendency to tell you exactly what I'm thinking. And so you always know where you stand with me. And that has served you very well, served me very well, and typically serves you very well too, but in the path toward leadership. So after becoming the clerkship director, I actually became the associate dean for curriculum for the School of Medicine, which meant that I took over the entire 4-year curriculum for the UNC School of Medicine and suddenly had 25 employees and an LCME visit coming down the pike. So they hired me because I was somebody who could get things done, and they needed things done. And we got it done. And so we passed the LCME accreditation, and I learned a ton, one of which the things that I learned was that I needed to be amongst my own tribe, and that my tribe was emergency medicine, and that No offense to anyone whose partner or friend or whatever is a psychiatrist or an internist, they have a lot more difficulty processing than we do. And so sometimes it can be very exasperating to be in a leadership role where you have to get that shared group decision making and people are moving at a pace that is not your own. So that was actually a really important leadership lesson for me, and it helped me to understand that you know, sometimes I just need to take a giant step backwards and let people process at their own rate. But that's hard to do when you're an emergency doc, and nobody really tells you that. So part and parcel of this session is to give you some tips like that that'll help you be successful in roles that extend beyond where you might necessarily see yourself and allow you to move forward in different spaces. So, you know, I was very happy moving back into the Department of Emergency Medicine as the vice chair, but at a certain point I realized that I needed to do something different, and so I decided that I was going to apply for chair jobs. So I looked at, it was a time where there were many chair positions open across the country, and my kids were in that gap where you can actually move, which for many of us is a barrier to actual movement in our lives. And so I actually looked at 5 jobs. I got invited back and was actually negotiating for a job when Kate Halpern called me up and said, there's a job in Indiana and you have to go see it. And I'm like, yeah, I'm already looking at a job and it's going to be, I'm going to New York. It's all going to be good. And Kate said, no, this is your job. And if you don't go look at this job, I'm never going to speak to you again. And she hung up. I'm like, okay. So then the search committee guy called me back and said, hey, I hear you talked to Kate. Now you're more interested? And I'm like, yes, I'll come. And so I came here, and then I looked around. I said, wow, this is a really great place. I'm really shocked. And so I've been here 6 years. I was completely astounded. I'm like, Indianapolis? Why would I ever go to Indianapolis? I'm not a race fan, right? You know, it's just not what I want to do. And then I found that it was a huge institution with a lot of throw weight, you know, a huge class, a well-established, well-functioning residency training program, and they needed somebody like me to take them to the next tier. And they were willing actually to support women in leadership and was able to have that dialogue. And one of the things that we'll talk about is finding a good boss. And when you look at the different roles and different things, you know, you got to really interrogate the boss, because that's important. And so this was a good fit for me. I've been here 6 years, and we're growing, we're recruiting, and we're drinking wine, and I'm going to pass this off to the next person.
Thank you. Finally, we'll have Dr. Stern speak.
Thanks. So thanks for the invitation to come here. I don't have nearly as entertaining or a good a story as anybody else, the people that have presented before me. My story is pretty mundane, but I think has a few things in common. So I'm currently the chair at the Department of Emergency Medicine at the University of Washington in Seattle. So what I have in common, I think, with the other leaders who have spoken here is I think that a lot of things have happened by serendipity, or what I would say is I've, you know, a lot of opportunities happen to present themselves, and I happen to take them. It wasn't that I was in a quest for being the chair of a department. That certainly was not my goal when I started out in medical school. My career started actually probably in high school. I actually became we had an Explorers Club, and in our senior year, I had the opportunity to join the second half of the year, which meant actually you spent more time doing practical learning than you did in class, and that sounded great to me. So I decided to join the Explorers Club and actually spent the second half of my senior year becoming an EMT, got a job volunteering for an ambulance, and then ultimately a volunteer job, and then ultimately a paid job. Went to college, didn't know what I wanted to do, switched from engineering to biology, and realized I was spending a lot of money, but had no clue to what I wanted to do, but thought afterwards, but had sort of felt like, you know what, I really want to be a paramedic. That's what I want to do now. I want to work now. I don't want to go to school now. So I left. I became a paramedic. I worked for a couple of years. That time, like the chairs group here, it was filled with men, even probably fewer women for the number of men that there were. So challenges in that way, lots of doubt from people around me, but really enjoyed my time. Found some mentors, white male mentors, because that's all there was. Even in that, at that time, was important and was very important for me, and with some encouragement, I decided to go back to school and go into pre-med. At that time, there was not a lot of emergency medicine. So ultimately went to medical school that didn't have a residency program. So again, you know, I was very much influenced by the mentors around me. So actually initially applied in internal medicine and emergency medicine, because there was no emergency medicine at that school. There is now. At that time, applications were also typed. You didn't have the computer or anything. So I wrote 2 different personal statements. You type out all your applications. And I went and mailed the internal medicine applications and not the emergency medicine applications, because, you know, the people that I respected most at that time or had most exposure to were actually the internal medicine docs. And I thought, oh, I could do critical care or cardiology. And one day I just woke up, I think it was a dream or something, and I said, I'm doing what they want me to do, not what I want to do. So I quickly mailed the applications to emergency medicine that were sitting on my living room floor with my fingers crossed that it wasn't too late. It was too late for some, but I got 6 interviews and a lot of calls back. If something opens up, we want to interview you. Went to those interviews and then ultimately ended up at the University of Cincinnati, where I was very happy. Again, sort of serendipitously, started, we had a research elective, we had an elective. Normally it came in your 4th year, and suddenly one resident, I don't know, things had to get switched around, so they said, would you do your elective early? I said, sure. And at one point in my first year, our program director, things were a little bit different there. At that time, there were no duty hours or anything like that. And I remember, and I was sort of the kind of person that just put your head down and just figured, at that time, it was, you know, you put your head down and you just sort of do your work and be unseen. I was the only woman in my class. There were no women faculty members. And I knew, based on comments I had heard, that okay, I'm going to learn a lot here, but the best way to succeed is going to be to put my head down and just do the work and be better than anyone else if I want to succeed. And so that's sort of what I did. Not saying I was better than anyone else, but I worked harder than anyone else probably. And one day I was sitting, I remember, in the fast track area, or what we used to call the minor violence area. And again, at those times, supervision was a little bit different. You would have a faculty member who would come in, check in, and then go up to their office and work and ask you if you had any questions. And so I remember the faculty member, who happened to be the program director at that time, who was not a very effusive individual, somebody who is a very good friend of mine right now, and was a great mentor to me, but was not an effusive individual, suddenly said something like, so have you thought about doing research at all? And this was the end of my first year, and I just sort of looked around and wondered who he was talking to. And he said, I'm talking to you. And I said, well, first I want to learn emergency medicine. But about 2 years later then, I had this elective, and I ended up doing some research in his lab, because I thought, well, this is the last time that I'm going to get to try that and explore that area before I go out and work or before I make a decision about a job. And it was a great experience. And so from there, I focused on research in resuscitation science and did a fellowship. And from there, I went to the University of Michigan with several people who had been my senior or mentor to be amongst them to build that program. At that time, it was just starting, and so we built that department, and I was lucky to be a part of that as a junior faculty member. As I said, I wasn't seeking to be a chair while I was there. I became the associate chair for education and also continued my research. I guess in my head, I was successful there in the sense, and that was clearly because of the people who I was surrounded by and the people that mentored me. And one day, my chair came into my office and said, you know, the University of Washington is looking for a division head, somebody to come and build a division there. And I said, that's nice. And he said, you know, of course they asked him if he wanted to go, but of course he wasn't interested. He had just built this great department at Michigan. And I said I had somebody in mind, but I wanted to ask them. And I said, that's nice. And he said, well, are you interested? And I looked at him like, what, are you crazy? First, I'm not sure I want to do that. Second, if you don't know the history of the University of Washington, it hasn't always been the friendliest place to emergency medicine. With his encouragement, he said, you know, you just need to start looking at these opportunities. And so with him, you know, sort of pushing behind me, he convinced me, and I went out and looked, and for many reasons that we can talk about separately, I ended up there. And, you know, after 9 years, we are now a Department of Emergency Medicine. And, but the long and the short of it is I would not have been able to do that without people encouraging me, the right mentorship, and, you know, being around other people, you know, your tribe, other people that are encouraging, that, you know, really that invest in your career and your well-being. So the lessons for me that I've learned are, you know, I've learned areas where I wish I would have had more mentorship. Lessons for me are that, you know, opportunities come and you need to take advantage of those things. It's not always obvious where they will be or what they are, what they will be. Just sort of, you know, my approach has been, I just sort of quietly get the job done. That's not always the greatest approach, and I'd be happy to talk to you about all of the mistakes I've made along the way.